Okay, I've sat here for almost an hour now, just thinking through a myriad of thoughts and got lost and came back and got lost again and grabbed a glass of tea and sat down and went through it all again. Oh my God. And I wish I could just openly relate what I feel like I need to in a different mode than this, but it's about as good as it gets whenever you just have me wing it because I'm able to make attachments. I know I lose people sometimes, and hopefully, after going through the things that and the videos that we have, we're developing a base ground of knowledge. And if you haven't seen a lot of the older ones, go back through them too, because we're talking about all kinds of different places, different epochs of times, and knowledge that was known by certain people at certain times and everything. And nowadays, most all of us look back at the Greeks and realize that they were really something that took it to another level. And of course, you've seen me in videos kind of get off on that. That the Egyptians had a whole bunch of crap too, and the Greeks got some of their crap from the Egyptians. But then there's also Sumerian knowledge that they got from there too, because that's where some of the Egyptians got theirs from and everything. And what was neat about the Greeks to me is that they were able to put things together in a culmination and perhaps see through some of the bullshit. Herodotus, which we're about to talk to, it was really just full of a bunch of hearsay. And you can imagine a bunch of people getting together after reading what Herodotus said, if you've ever read it all, and trying to put together reality. Because in that ancient time, where you didn't know something was, you made up things or you heard accounts, and it could get whipped into a frenzy. And it's why you see on ancient maps the dragons are here and things, because of ancient tales which apparently Phoenician sailors told around to people. So they were the only ones that were going around doing all of the merchanting to them. And looking back, things are 2020 sometimes whenever you do it, or at least 2015. Whereas before, you weren't even wearing glasses on and you were asking somebody what was happening. Anyhow, I don't want to go spindling off before I get started. So let's go through this right here and discover and talk about the four discoveries of the ancient Greek astronomy that still baffles experts. And I'll see if I can make some clarity to it. And I think in seeing this here, I'm thinking this is another good predecessor before we ever get into an idea of sacred geometry and stuff, but it shows a bit of it. We've talked a lot about Herodotus. The histories by Herodotus, he lived between 484 BC to about 425 BC in the 5th century, offers a remarkable window into the world as it was known by the ancient Greek astronomy in the mid 5th century BC, and a whole lot of other things, and accounts from other people. That's really what most of it's about, for he's the father of history. Almost as interesting as what they knew, however, is what they did not know. This sets the baseline for the remarkable advances in their understanding over the next few centuries, simply relying on what they could observe with their own eyes. ... and not what they were told. Putting a dramatic pause there, because that's how that happened. And if you just think through that statement again, it's not just a bland blah put out to you, but it literally. So Herodotus and these things were going on, and they were telling all kinds of tales about giant ants collecting gold and cows with horns so big they had to walk backwards, and all these people, and these people say they were the most ancient people, and these people say they were this, and these people say they were this. And he accounts it to that, and quite often, and people say, you know, oh, a lot of that's bullshit. No, look at him, he tells you. In fact, a lot of times he tells you, I don't believe this crap, but this is what they said. In fact, a couple of them will be mentioned in here off of it, so we'll go through them. But that baseline that you can think of about that time would have been fairly well what people knew in Greece, but also showing you what a lot of other people knew. Not a conglomerative like we're looking at Greece, but some of the things they knew. And out of that, you could glean how far out in the left field they were, right? If you thought of it on those standpoints and stuff. And no, he didn't go. You know, he found tellings of India and stuff, and retellings of stuff that goes to the Orient type area, but didn't really go out there. And it looks like he didn't really go that far up Egypt and talk to some of these people that he apparently talked to. And other accounts looks like they must have been joking this dude, and he wrote it down. But that's the way we look at it nowadays. But over the next few centuries, there's a radical difference between what you're led to believe they probably thought at the time of Herodotus and then what showed up because they simply started relying on what they could observe with their own eyes. And this is foundations of science, if you will, the way we look at it today. And then there's that scientific method, Socratic method, and all these things that people look at, where people looked at things a certain way, and they go, well, so what if you flipped a bottle and made it stand up whenever it landed? Is this repeatable? And so this isn't an automatic thing, right? But then they started loading dice and trying to make an automatic thing out of things. And they found trickery, way to do things, way to manipulate things in certain ways that nobody else, it seems, had going on. And I've told you a few times that some of these things we're looking at, which somehow people, and I know if you're not real into histories and into this type of stuff, especially those, and people that are, you can look back to where you weren't, are thinking people are so separated and that they don't have much contact with each other and didn't even know hardly, and hey, this guy over here, and he went all the way to blah, no one ever did that, and they said blah, you know, everything. And it's not like that at all. I mean, these spice roads were going on, and the Silk Road. I mean, there's silk inside of Pharaoh's tombs that predate this just like hell. And growing up and stuff, and you know, finding out Marco Polo and all this type of stuff, and then you go and find out, oh, okay, so that's not even the way it really went down. But if you don't go finding that, then you'll never know that you never knew that you never knew. And I'm guessing that's what drives me somewhat, and drives me to try to bring this information to you, because I not to sound or compare me to Jesus in any way, but so whenever Jesus goes around and he goes, well, you've heard this, right? And then he goes, blah, okay? And I'm kind of doing that here, where it's like, a lot of times you may have this picture in your mind that they've been told because of the way things are said and go through, and then whenever you come look at it, if you get into history totally, you know, able to get into Spencer's little time machine here and go back, it's all of a sudden it's like, no, not so much, not really. So Herodotus somewhat sets a baseline, but it also sets a baseline for knowing how much bullshit's out there and things like that, guys. And there's two sides to every coin, and blah, 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 and I could just sit and go off for hours before I even start this. So let's just begin. One of the accounts that this person says makes it all stand out. Herodotus claimed that Africa was surrounded almost entirely by sea. Well, how did he know this? Well, he recounts the story of Phoenician, italicized there, sailors who were dispatched by King Necho II of Egypt about 600 BC before his time to sail around the continent of Africa in a clockwise fashion. That means starting out in the Red Sea, where they had to take and bring a boat to there in the first place. And this story, if true, recounts the earliest known circumnavigation of Africa, but also contains an interesting insight into the astronomical knowledge of the ancient world. And many have heard this story. And if you look at Herodotus' map of the time, they don't even know sub-Saharan Africa existed. It basically goes off to the desert and becomes the nothing. And you can't pass it or whatever, but hey, wonder if you can go around it, and what's it look like from the other side, and palm trees, what's going on there. And the Phoenicians apparently didn't tell them much, or that old part of the story is left out somewhat. But we get weird accounts and weird drawings on maps that say once they get past the Horn of Africa, they say that in the Horn of Africa there's these real tall people and they're long-lived, fair-skinned people, Caucasians. But you keep going around there a little bit, and then all of a sudden there's these dog-faced people. There's weird accounts of that, and you see it on maps and stuff. There's these people that don't have 2 feet, but they have one big leg and a foot, and their foot is so big, even though they're at the equator and it's so hot, what they do to shade themselves is they stick their foot up in the air, and their foot shades them from the sun. Now, what kind of bullshit is that? Dog-faced people. People have said, well, that's probably sub-Saharans and their prognathism and everything and stuff, and woolish hair and everything, and it's like, no, that's silly shit. And they've got dog people over here too, and then they've got people that don't have a head, and they got a mouth in the middle of their body and all this other stuff, so you can't pull off that. And I could go on and on about what I thought about each one of these things, but I'm just mentioning it there. But so what he did was he sent them off in the Red Sea, and they went all the way around, and this took them a couple of years basically, and they got back to him. And this account of what really happened to them and landing and what they met and stuff is in other accounts, where they even say coming out of the Pillars of Hercules, they went on down to a certain point, saw lava at night, from a volcano type thing, fires. They made a little camp there, and they heard all kinds of drums, and they left because they knew that it wasn't good. There's an account of them actually trading with people down there that they knew they didn't have favor with yet, but this is apparently how that might happen. But also it might show you how they keep from passing disease, and already had done it sometimes and had learned from it, the Phoenicians, because they say they come down and hit the shore of this place where they know these people are, and they put their goods out on the shore, and then they make a fire and raise it up and go out and get in the boat and get just offshore, and the people come because of the fire that's there and see all the stuff, and so they take their goods and they put it out there, and then they go back into the forest again, or jungle again. They come and get back to the shore, and they walk out, and if it's good enough, they take the new goods and leave them the stuff. And somehow this handshake is taking place, and you can imagine that this might be some semblance of the way that some things went on with some primitive people around the world and uncontacted people in the very first times and stuff, especially when you see people like the first time people in Irian Jaya ever see somebody, or whenever natives still living deep in the Amazon rainforest and stuff that are still basically pretty much primitives and back in the state of Indians and things. And how they might react, and how you should probably carry yourself whenever you do something like that, or what the possibilities are. Anyhow, that contains insight into astronomical knowledge of the world, and it's something simple that's mentioned here. The voyage took several years, having rounded the southern tip of Africa and following a westerly course. So, they come down Africa, and then they come out of the Red Sea and around the Horn, and they come around Africa, and then they start going a westerly course and come around it, right? And whenever they come around it there, they're headed west. And following that westerly course, the sailors said that they had observed the sun as being on their right-hand side above the northern horizon. Now, to the people of the northern hemisphere, the sun has always been where it comes almost up to being with you at peak of summer, and then falls down and gets lower and lower and comes back up. And it's believed at this time that they did not know that when it fell down, it broke the equator and it went down farther, and so it's summer down there when it's winter up here, and winter and summer down there. So this is also showing you that it was summer up here when they were going around, or it would have still been overheadish or whatever, and it still would have been kind of overhead, but instead of overhead this side, which it always is in sailing up here in the Mediterranean and stuff, Tropic of Capricorn and they're up here. You go way down there and you pass that and you get the Tropicorn of Cancer and stuff, and then you're seeing it on the other side. Even during coming into summer, and especially winter, it's way the hell over there, right? So he accounts it to them, right? And the sun was on the right side above the northern horizon. This observation simply did not make sense at the time, because they did not yet know that the earth has a spherical shape and that there is even a southern hemisphere. Again, after we figure all this out, we're still led to believe some concept like that. But whenever you hear things about talking about the underworld and the concept, that's basically, in many cases, to the south, below the tropic, and looked at as being there. And it's looked at as being, well, the world ends right about there. Well, there's the tip of India that gets close. There's Australia, some islands and stuff, but everything else, Antarctica, everything else is above. We don't know about South America yet, but South America is a counterpart. It's kind of the Africa of the other side of the world's places. And there's always something I thought that was weird about that, because it's kind of in the same position-ish. But what you find happening in South America is a huge jungle, rivers running through it and everything, and then in Africa it's basically just turned to a desert wasteland and with pockets to it, and it's like, it's got to be a radical difference between what's happening here and there. I don't want to be a weather man or anything like that, so let's go on to the same point, but still in this same deal here, where the sun was on the other side, and he thought that they must be lying. Well, if you look at the map, they didn't know sub-Saharan Africa exists, and so if you take Herodotus' map, man, let me do this real quick. Where's an open Google or whatever? Damn, I'll go to that. And let me just go to, which video is this? I'll just go back on it later. Let's go to Google. Go to Herodotus' map. When you put it in, you'll see this thing here and all these depictions of it that are variations on a theme, but basically this was compiled to what Herodotus' map looked like. And this is a little blurry because they're not great image and blown up. But you can see here, but they didn't know sub-Saharan Africa existed. Well, if we pull up this picture, it really cuts off right there. Just like it cuts off right there. They're not even correctly showing the Horn of Africa, and then it doesn't have anything to the rest of it, right? It's cut off. India's not showing the blob. It actually says Eastern Ethiopians are over here. Better than that, Ethiopians are every brown spot that's on this map right here. That's what this one declamates, and where they talked about them in the Iliad and the Odyssey. So Ethiopians are not those people that are living out here near the Horn today that are said to be Ethiopians that are living above the Egyptians at that time. And that place was called Abyssinia up until recently, but I've got enough videos and talk about that going through all the things. But you can see Necho going around here, and in fact on this map here it actually says it here in Necho's voyage 600. So it comes around here and back in and through, and then whenever he got back to them, told them all the accounts. Well, if you look here, they think that the Nile actually came from the Atlas Mountains and stuff. They don't know where the head of the Nile was. It took Dr. Livingston, I presume, to find out where the headwaters of the Niles are, you know. And then it comes from the great rift valleys and Lake Victoria and stuff down here. So, and none of that's on this map. Well, none above Britain and everything and all that's not on the map. No, it's not. And the way China looks isn't on the map too. And North America's not here either. But they thought that if you went down this far and went across here, even at the sun's point that it goes to its lowest point, you aren't going to be seeing it on the right side of the ship like you're talking about. It might be right up ahead during summer, but whenever you were down there, it was summer up here, so you're a liar. Well, no, in reality, when it is summer up there, the sun gets up to where it's cutting across way up here, and if you're on a boat here, that's on your right side. If you're headed west, going this way, it's on your right-hand side. This, where the sun is, comes into effect a few times, actually. But let's just go back here. Because I've got to get through these 4 ideas that are gone there. And we haven't even got to the first one that they're talking about. That was just a premise that's led in there saying, well, they didn't really know. Well, no one had been there. And so whenever somebody says they've been there and they come back with a big fish story, you might be inclined to call bullshit on it. Well, they're already buying that these dragons were going around and everything else. Really? Were they? Well, apparently no one else was doing it and everything else. Well, did anybody else have a maritime fleet that was that big? Well, I've shown you that there were a lot of people going around in boats back then. You think it was only the Phoenicians going around for a long time. And there may be some truth to that they were going all over the place. But other people were making treks and doing things also, and it didn't come later as people think. But a lot of it was done over land, but a lot of it was done by a ship right across there. You can imagine going in the Aegean to come across to Anatolia, that one of them is almost in sight if you get into a boat, and the other one is going to take you months maybe to go around and get there. It's a big difference. It's like saying I'm going to drive a car there and I'm going to take a jet. And when they started having horses and things, that just changed everything. And man, if you can Pony Express things, you can get it there overnight. Let's look at these accounts here. The planets orbit the sun. A few centuries later, there had been a lot of progress from Herodotus' time. For Aristarchus of Samos, which is just less than 100 years later, born to 150 years later, argued that the sun was the central fire of the cosmos and placed all of the known planets in their correct order of distance around it. This is the earliest known heliocentric theory of the solar system. No, I'm going to tell you that people have realized that there are Sumerian accounts where it seems like it was that too. And there's even a cylinder seal which kind of shows this ideal that they had it going on, and you'd be amazed what the Sumerian knowledge was, and perhaps a lot of this Sumerian knowledge was part of the stuff that was supposedly lost at the Library of Alexandria. But it wasn't like you could pick up a Sumerian tablet in the Library of Alexandria and all of a sudden stare at it and all of a sudden you understood how the planets went, people. You'd have to understand Sumerian, and how many people did they have there that could do so? Well, apparently they had it. Apparently they had Sumerian to Akkadian translations, and people knew Akkadian. Akkadian form of cuneiform was kind of the lingua franca, if you will. Kind of like the English, or at least was used in trades between these Middle Eastern people. So, this is kind of a who knew what then and who knew what when. But unfortunately, the original text in which he makes this argument has been lost to history, so we cannot know for certain how he worked it out. But Aristarchus knew that the sun was much bigger than the earth or the moon, and he may have surmised that it should therefore have the central position in the solar system. And when you look at it, the sun and the moon are the same size, and the sun is tidally locked, always facing at us, and this is the man and the moon. This is Kingu of the Sumerians. And it's a hell of a lot bigger. And the concept is it's 400 times bigger, multiplied, than the moon would be, but it's 400 times further. So it's like having having a golf ball up close to you and taking a basketball way back here and putting it up, and actually if you match them they end up being the same size. But everybody knows that the sun goes on the back side of the moon, so the moon's closer, and they wanted to know how much closer. Well, eclipses helped him out with that in a radical way, but I'm telling you that whenever they were looking at this information, this was archaic information already. For there are strangenesses in the names of these Greeks. And while I don't want to take anything away from certain Greeks, and we know everything, and they put it all together and they stick this name on him, because nobody names their child Aristarchus. Archus and archaic means old. Archaic. Arista is part of the aristocratics and everything. So this is what the old nobles knew. Old nobles of Samos. Is that what we get out of it? A lot of these names are somewhat telling. King Herod and Herodotus, that point towards things that, let's not go there. Nevertheless, it's a jaw-dropping finding, especially when you consider that it wasn't rediscovered until the 16th century by Nicholas Copernicus, who even acknowledged Aristarchus during the development of his own work. So, what we have here is the Dark Ages. And understand that the Dark Ages came for a reason. And that I recently showed you a video of part of the plagues in the Dark Ages were caused by Krakatoa's volcano, and a simultaneous one that happened in South America. And because both of those are effectively on the other side of the world, nobody even knew what the cause was, but we sure as hell see the effects of it. And it took till a modern time, and modern being able to time things out, and then looking at other people's accounts and finally putting this together. Well, people did it a little while long ago, but it's still not well known. Why? Because that's catastrophe things, and you don't want to tell anybody about that. It gets them scared. Well, no, we're not. We're not trying to get. There's a difference between aware and scared. And don't pull some men in black crap and say like, well, everybody can understand it, but people are stupid. You know, you're gonna have to get past that. Try to explain it to people. But so they knew there was different sizes going on. Here's a depiction in what looks like bad art and a bad haircut of Copernicus, the first man to rediscover Aristarchus' finding from ancient Greek astronomy. I'm telling you, the Greeks, whenever they were looking at it, were looking at somebody else's information, and all of a sudden a light bulb went off and they put two and two together. Had anybody ever put two and two together? Yes. This is part of the sacred knowledge that nobody's supposed to know anything about. It's amazing how a large proportion of the sacred knowledge that Gnosticism, that no one's ever supposed to know about, ends up being based on astrotheology, and we kind of know all about it. In fact, we took steps past it. We have stepped on the moon. These Caucasians that drive through this, that helped herald humanity, have gone way past this point now, and we're looking back at a time and trying to figure out, well, how primitive they were, and we always want to look back and go, oh, here's when they knew that. Well, you can go back and see some things else. Well, here they developed Pythagorean theorem. Well, you can see Pythagorean theorem in Stonehenge and in all these other places, and the Sumerian stuff and Egypt stuff that predates that by far, all the way back. And I've showed you recently in a deal in Göbekli Tepe's got it in their figuring, and people have coordinated this versus just me going, this looks like, you know. So how far does it go back? And I'm saying that it's bullshit, and that it's over a few times been passed around in these knowledge, and it got knocked away. And the ancient Sumerians' ideals on things somehow got lost. And then there was a renaissance at this point, and a new understanding, taking it to another level at the Greeks. It's a little different way of looking at it, just a little bit different, but it's more reality if you'll follow me. Everybody following me? It had long been observed that the sun and the moon appeared to be of the same apparent size in the sky, and that the sun was further away. They realized this from solar eclipses caused by the moon passing in front of the sun at certain distance from the earth. And that's an easy way to understand it, Also, the instant when the moon is at our first or third quarter, Aristarchus reasoned that the sun and earth and moon would form a right-angled triangle. Now, an easy way to deduct this is something that even is shown on Sumerian tablets describing concepts. So this looks like the same idea. In fact, a closer look would realize that they already had trigonometry going on, and they already knew an ideal of a right triangle, and the MEs, the MEs that they had, where they laid everything out, is all based on this too. And so they had it going on. Well, did they know the distance of the sun? I can't find that number, 92 million miles or whatever. I can't find that number. But I can find where it looks like they knew the order of the universe. And they apparently, in their lineage, if they knock out the planets in order, which it appears they do, they knew about Neptune and Uranus, which we didn't know about until much, much later. I mean, Uranus is found in 1900s here. We're really, Pluto after. So it's amazing. And how would they even know something like that? Well, back then there was not a lot of bleed light. They could see things. People were paying attention. Some people's job, they do good. And some people's job, who in the Bible they talk about shepherds by night, watching the stars. And that's not quite what's going on in any way, shape, or form. So Pythagoras is a funny name too, for the pith is the center of a date palm tree. And they always put us and os on the end of it and stuff, and if you take it and for what it is, it comes up with a name that you wouldn't put on a baby. But it comes up with that he's got to the heart of something, basically. Huh. Strange how he got that name. Doubt it was his childhood name. Almost seems like it was put upon him. As Pythagoras had determined how the links, I'm going to go and do a separate one on Pythagoras and these others, separately total. Just to break into it here, I did one. I watched a series, and it's What the Ancients Knew. And I was like, there's a good title for one, so I'll watch the video and see what I can get out of it. And as I watched it, I found that I could pretty much overdub like I do in this crap all the way through it. And it had Bethany Hughes in it and stuff and everything, very appealing. And it's done in that open documentary style and everything, works real well. So I recorded 3 45-minute things going in through there and thought I'm going to edit out a little bit of it. And by the time I got them all three edited and uploaded, they flagged me already for content. And this is a while back. They've had these video things out for a while. Bethany's gone on different things. But in that series, they show you what these people knew, but also they make simple explanations in the one deal, and they're showing Archimedes' screw and stuff like that, and they know that it came before, and it looked like there was in the Babylon gardens and a way to use that and everything, and they make a few hints through this whole series. I started it off talking about that, and then I was going to talk about, what do they knew when? Well, they brought us this. Well, this is a derivative of this, and these people had this, and these people had this, and there's this, and there's that, and try to show it to you. Thought I did a pretty good job through that one, really. I had a little side source video and a couple of little places where in there I could click right to it and go, well, look at this. And it's not that we didn't know that way before this show was made, so they're still touting this narrative. It's not quite the same, and I can understand them propping up the Greeks, and when they did the Romans, they propped up the Romans. But when they do the Sumerians, they prop up the Sumerians, and some of this stuff context a little bit of the content in the Greek part. Not much, but just a little bit. But that's because it doesn't go to its full extent of what it could do. Let me continue. As Pythagoras had determined how the lengths of triangle sides were related to a couple of centuries earlier, and this is the Pythagorean theorem and way things relate in geometry, alternate angles are congruent, all these things come out of this. Aristarchus used the triangle to estimate the distance to the sun was between 18 and 20 times the distance to the moon. He also estimated the size of the moon was approximately 1/3 of that of the Earth, and this is based on careful timing of lunar eclipses. You watch a lunar eclipse and the Earth makes a shadow across the moon, and looking at how much of the arc, I don't want to go into this whole thing. This one kid does this 20-minute show on it, and he explains it, and he explains in another video that's about 40 minutes long how they figured out the size of the Earth and the size of the moon and its distance and everything off of it. I'm going to go into this a little bit in the sacred geometry, but I'm not going to blow a whole thing on just that one concept. I'll show enough of it and have beat around the bush enough to where when we get to it, we won't have to do that, hopefully. But looking at that careful timing of lunar eclipses, he realized how big the arc of the Earth is versus how big the shadow is. And you can imagine if they take and put a torch inside a box and make a lantern out of it and make their own fake sun projecting light, which is all coming at you from this one point, because that's the sun, that they could set around fruit in different places, and then walking back over where the sun was, they would all look lit up because they're shining by the sun. But if I walk over here to this piece of fruit, I'm going to call Earth, and I look at that piece of fruit, it's a crescent now with the way it's lit up, and I'm going to call that the moon. And so, hold on, what's this angle? Well, the moon crescent gets a little less. Let me scoot that over. That's the way it looks whenever it has a little thin crescent on the moon. So then, so what's that angle? Oh, snap. And then things start to happen. But what doesn't happen is everything they think or they say think happens out of it without already having a basis in sacred geometry and the concepts of what equals what and percentages of this, that, and the other that they figure out that comes through this into modern geometry. Now, this is a depiction of what he had come up with and how Earth and how things towards the middle, the center, arcs get done. And so you could say, well, how much was this going? How much was, and all these figurings here are figuring on the shadow that casted across it, and then how big would it have to be for it to block it out exactly, and he comes up with that type of figure. It's not too bad. He's taking a shot at it. I'd like for you to go to some South American country and then go, okay, how far is the sun away from the earth? And they'd be, I don't know. And they go, figure it out. Go deep into the jungle there. Anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa. Places like that. Talk to an Australian Aborigine. They have any idea? Sure, they might have some little mythology they built into a concept, but this was figured out long ago and locked in stone as if it was. So this is a 10th century reproduction of a diagram of Aristarchus showing some of the geometry he used in his calculations, demonstrating advancements made in ancient Greek astronomy. So where does this come from? Because the Library of Alexandria got burned down and everything. I'm telling you, there is a library in Greece that they were doing the same thing with. The Library of Alexandria was built in Alexandria. So this is well after Alexander, and they'd come there, and they'd been there for a while. And they loved the concept of this, and so they had created their own. Did it have everything copied and all that? No, but they had a lot of the information, and better yet, they had gleaned information out of it, put figures like this on papers and everything, and moved it up there. All that got lost to time, lost to people and everything. People kept it. No telling how many people stared at this and said, well, what's that mean? And it took a scientist trying to use the sacred geometry that pretty much became lost, except for in certain circles, to finally reach a certain point. And it comes to that. It took till certain people like Newton that had developed enough sacred geometry and Gnosticism to start putting other things together, and doing it while questioning came up with many more theories that led to our scientific theory that we have now. There are people going through a lot of scientific theories for a long time before this. Damn, I thought I would get this in under one. You know me though, I always very optimistic. So the size of the earth, and they knew the earth was round. And I'm telling you, they knew the earth was round back then. While it's estimated on the sun was too low, the actual ratio was 390 on account of the lack of telescope precision available at the time, and taking a good shot at it after looking at how much of a circle that crosses across in front of the moon, having to wait for a couple of lunar eclipses to even pull it off. So this is not something new. It was going on and waiting for a moment, and believe me when I tell you, they knew when the next moon was going to come. So we're going on to the next part here, because it's going to click here in any minute. And so I'm going to try to get through that. But the Earth to Moon ratio was surprisingly accurate. The moon has a diameter of 0.27 times that of Earth, so it's close to 1/3, like he was saying. Today we know the size and distance of the moon accurately by a variety of means, including precise telescopes, radar, and laser reflectors that are left on the surface by Apollo astronauts. Part 2 in your top left-hand corner, guys. I'll see you there. Peace.